I think the great thing about 30 Days of World Building is, the reason I called it that is because if you do one prompt per day, there are 30 prompts, and obviously it came from this Instagram challenge originally. So it's a really nice, concise guide to creating an entire world, because it literally takes you from scratch, from deciding what genre you're going to write in, because that determines what kind of world you build, right up to creating an entire world ready to drop your characters into it. So the book itself actually restricts you in, right, these are your 30 prompts. After this, just go and write the blooming book. Because I'm like that. I could world build forever.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 237 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, I have an interview. Yeah, I do. It's true. In this episode, I trip over my tongue, and I don't cut it out, but I leave it in the introduction because, hey, it's fun, right? But seriously, in this episode, I have an interview with Angeline Trevena, an author of dystopian urban fantasy and post-apocalyptic fiction, a podcaster, an events manager, and the author of a number of phenomenal books about world building. Now, we talk a lot about her world building. We talk about food and world building, which made me hungry listening back to this. But it is a phenomenal conversation, and I know you're going to love it, and it's coming up later in this episode. First, let's hear a word about this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Findaway Voices. It is February 2022, and Findaway Voices. Another mess up I'm just going to leave in there. Wow, this is crazy that I'm leaving all these messes in there. Findaway Voices Marketplace is now live, I tells you. And if you logged into your Findaway Voices dashboard, you look over on the left-hand nav and you'll see a little microphone. If you hover over it, you'll see it says Find Voices, and you can browse, search, and invite prospective narrators for your next project. I'm looking at it on February 24th, 2022, and I see 1,356 different narrators available to work for you. You can refine and sort by name. So I'd be looking for Scott Overton because I use him a lot, obviously. You can search by name if there's a narrator that you're interested in because maybe you saw their books on Audible or some other online platform. You can look for work availability, what they're looking for. Obviously, it's like, available in 1 to 2 to 3 months, I see. I'm actively looking for jobs. You can do verified voices, which is basically a program that basically allows... a green checkmark badge means that rights holders should know that the narrator has verified their payment profile. So narrators with a green checkmark give the author assurance that the narrator is who they say they are. They've confirmed everything. So that's kind of a nice little, check balance just to help you as an author. You can look at people who are open to Voices Share, which is sort of a royalty split program where it's not like the one that you get on ACX, but what happens is you'll pay the narrator upfront about 50% of what you would normally pay them for a project, and they get a small cut of your sales. So the narrator isn't taking all the risk, which is not fair to narrators. But you've got other, you can do by gender, you can do by explicit content levels. So if you want a narrator who hasn't performed sweary books because you're doing sweet romance or children's books or something like that, violence levels, etc. There's all kinds of great filters. There's even samples. You can browse by samples, and you can see samples by accent, by feeling, like, warm, etc., breathy, bright, clear, cold, the voice age, young adult, 12 to 20, or the voice pitch, high, mid-tone, deep. Oh my God, this marketplace is more than I dreamed it was possible. I'm just so excited with the marketplace, and that's just one of the things you can do when you self-serve with Findaway Voices. So if you want to learn how you can leverage Findaway Voices as an author, you can check them out over at starkreflections.ca/Findaway. Okay, quick personal update. I want to get right into the interview on this one, but I did want to share, as I shared in episode 236, which was a between-episode, a bonus episode, which was my reflective roundtable with 4 of my awesome patrons. I want to say a special thank you to Faye and Kathy and Alyssa and Maddie. What a wonderful conversation. I had a good time with you guys, so thank you guys so much for that. I'll be posting, obviously, the next one for March relatively soon, because we're getting towards the end of February. But one of the things I did mention at the very end of that episode was related to the Superstars Writing Seminars at superstarswriting.com, conference I got back from a couple weeks ago. I have a code. I have a Stark Reflections code for you, dear listeners. If you are interested in going to Superstars, I will admit it's very expensive to go, especially the first time. For alumni, it's cheaper, but the very, very first time you get in there, it's expensive. And I know it sounds weird, but I kind of like that because it means you really need to be taking your writing seriously to get there. It is an intense, 3 to 4 days, depends on if you add the craft day to it, an intense experience where you're interacting with, and again, it's probably only going to be about 350 people for 2023. It was about 260 for 2022. It's been growing slowly, and that's by design, and that's on purpose, because there is a real feeling of family, or, as we say in the Superstars, of tribe. These are your tribe members. These are the people who have your back. And there's not a single tribe member that I wouldn't be there for if they reached out to me and they needed some help. And I love that about this community. That's why I've been going to Superstars for more than 10 years. And that's why, if you are interested in checking it out, you can get $100 US off. This is good until about middle of June 2022. If you go to superstarswriting.com and you go to register for February 2023, you can put in this code, STARK SSWS 2023. And SSWS is Superstars Writing Seminar. So all caps, STARK SSWS 2023 can get you $100 off your registration if you have never gone to Superstars before. If you are an alumni and you've gone to Superstars before, it's already going to be way cheaper than just $100 off for you. So something to check out, something to think about. And I'm really hoping the world cleans up a little bit in terms of the pandemic and all the things that are going on, because there were a lot of masks. I wore a mask pretty much every time except when I was eating or at the bar. Of course, I was at the bar a lot, but, that's me. But this was, this is just so great to see people again. Anyways, that's enough about the awesomeness of Superstars Writing Seminars. I am so thrilled that I had a chance to chat with Angeline about this world building. I'm going out and I'm just going to order all her books in print. I'll probably do that. See if I can order them through local indie bookstore, just to support that local indie bookstore, and of course to support Angeline, who is an awesome person. But also, special treat for my patrons is I am going to be doing a drawing for a free copy of the second edition of her book on world building. That's going to go to one of my awesome patrons. So if you are a patron, go check it out. I will be sharing that over on at patreon.com/starkreflections. And the way I normally do draws like this is, so you get sort of the 3 levels of patrons, and so you get 1 entry with your name entered once at the $1 a month level. You get 2 entries at the $3 a month level, and you get 3 entries at the $5 a month level, and then that way it just gives different patrons multiple chances to win. I do a random number generation, and then I reach out to you on Patreon and say, hey, where can I drop ship this book? Because what I'll probably do is I'll drop ship it depending on where you live, from your favorite local bookstore, or potentially from Amazon or some other retailer that I know can get access to Angeline's books. Because again, why not support one of my awesome guests and support the awesome people who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections. So that is it for the introductory matter for this episode. I want to jump into, notice this time I didn't say right into, I did that very consciously. Let's jump into this interview with Angeline Trevena. Angeline, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So there's many things we want to talk about. I think one of the first things I wanted to talk about was specifically, you just released the second edition of the world building book, or 30 days of world building.
30 days of world building.
This is not a book I can use in February, even on a leap year then, right? Because I'll just be one day short.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Yes.
You should.
You'll
no,
have
you
to
didn't
wait for
launch
March.
it. You did not launch it in February, did you?
No, I released it in December. So
Perfect.
No, this one actually, the second edition. The first edition came out in December. The second edition came out. Oh goodness, I didn't think that through. I did it right at the end of January.
That's okay. You did it in a month with 31 days. That's fine.
Just
yeah, perfect.
Just.
No, so I was just teasing you about that. So world building. I mean, when you think about world building, I know there's legends that God created the earth in 7 days, but authors takes them a lot longer. So why did you write the first edition? What was the need for the world building? Was that something you were always passionate about as a writer?
Yeah, I am like nuts on world building. I've always loved fantasy, and sort of my first steps into fantasy as a child were those choose your own adventure books, where at the end of the chapter it would be like, if you want the characters to take the path to the ocean, turn to this page. If you want them to go and explore the castle, turn to this page. I loved them. My local library had a huge collection of them, and I just worked my way through. So it was probably inevitable that I was going to end up being an author, because I really loved controlling the story.
Yeah.
But then when I was 16, I read the Chronicles of Narnia, and I've been completely obsessed ever since. And that was really what got me into world building. And I get very excited and quite nerdy about world building. And though I was writing a particular story, it was only a short story, and I started creating particular food that was specific to the world that I was writing. And that was the moment where I went, okay, I'm like a real world building nerd now. this is serious. And so 30 Days of World Building actually started life as an Instagram photo challenge. You know, those challenges on Instagram where you have a prompt for each day of the week, of the month. And we did it for our podcast, and we did it over a 30-day month, and it was 30 days of world building. I then expanded that challenge into a worksheet and expanded on some of the points. And then I looked at it and I was like, this would make a great book, actually. Oh. So I turned it into a book, and that was the first edition. So that was released December 2019, and pretty much as soon as I'd published it, I started on my second world building book, which was How to Destroy the World, which is about making dystopian and post-apocalyptic worlds, which they're my favorite genres. I love them so much. And so I started writing this in December 2019, and then finished it. I finished writing it like just as the UK went into its first COVID lockdown.
Or dystopian.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, is this the right time to release a book about writing post-apocalyptic worlds?
As a virus consumes the, yeah.
I know. I was like, this is either really, really brilliant timing or really, really bad timing.
Right.
And I didn't want people to think that I was like profiteering from what was happening in the world. And I almost didn't publish it. And then but I'm really impatient. That's partly why I'm an indie author, really. And so I was like, we'll just do it. So I published it, and it sold. People loved it. So yeah, and so then Sanctity to Sorcery came out after that, which was about making a magic system.
Yeah.
And then How to Create History, which is, well, about creating history, myths, and monsters.
Yeah.
And yeah, so this January, literally just a few weeks ago, I released the second edition of 30 Days of World Building, which is bigger, bulkier, better, hopefully.
So there's sort of a string of questions all tied back to the same thing. So one of the things I know a lot of speculative fiction authors, science fiction, fantasy authors, and they love their world building. In fact, they love their world building so much that they never get on to writing the book because they're having so much fun building worlds. Like they're dungeon masters, right? Like, yeah, I'm going to create this thing. Who cares if we go on an adventure? I know what food they eat. So a question I have, sort of first question, and then we'll get back to the second question after, because it's probably going to be a wonderful answer that we may have to go, what was the second question? Is there an element in 30 Days of World Building in the first book, or maybe the second edition of the first book, that is a reminder of authors not to fall into the rabbit hole of world building, like when to actually start the novel? Are there tips or tricks that you offer authors?
Yeah, I think the great thing about 30 Days of World Building is, the reason I called it that is because if you do one prompt per day, there are 30 prompts, and obviously it came from this Instagram challenge originally. So it's a really nice, concise guide to creating an entire world, because it literally takes you from scratch, from deciding what genre you're going to write in, because that determines what kind of world you build, right up to creating an entire world ready to drop your characters into it. So the book itself actually restricts you in, right, these are your 30 prompts. After this, just go and write the blooming book. Because I'm like that. I could world build forever. I really could. And then the following books, if people want to do a deeper dive into particular aspects of world building, then go and get the other books. But yeah, right, with 30 days, it restricts people to that. And I keep iterating in the book that you will almost certainly do more world building than will end up in your novel. It's just the way you're always going to come up with grand ideas that when you start writing, you're like, oh, I can't really shoehorn this in anywhere, or something becomes not as important as you thought it was going to be. So yeah, I keep reminding people that they'll probably do more world building than will end up in the novel. And then there's tips and tricks about what to actually include, because I have these 3 rules for world building, because I would put ridiculous amounts of world building into my novels if I wasn't quite strict on myself. So every bit of world building that goes into your novel should be doing one of 3 things, or more of 3 things. It should be revealing character, it should be pushing the plot forward, it should be exploring the themes of your novel. And if it is doing none of those 3 things, then you probably don't need it. But if it's hitting one or more of those 3 things, then yeah, bung it in. But I'm a great believer in, if you've got something that's just super cool and you just want to put it in because it will make your readers go, oh my goodness, that's so awesome, then just do it. Just whack it in there.
I love that. I like that guidance, so that you can help an author recognize when it's moving the story forward, as opposed to just a beautiful setting we're just going to stare at for a while. So you started off with the 30 Days World Building, and then you went into dystopian, then you went into sorcery and magic and myths and history. Did you always know there would be more books in the series, or did that happen after you wrote it and you went, no, wait, there's more, but we've got to do it differently?
Yeah. I'm not a big planner. I am a complete incurable discovery writer, and I live my life in exactly the same way. I'm not a planner. I'm not a goal setter. I live very much for the moment.
What?
And what?
Hang on a second. You're helping authors build an entire world and plan out very
Yes.
strategically, very much like a
Yes.
project manager, very organized, very
Yep.
outliney, 30 days of building an entire world, and yet you pants. So does the
this
world
is how
building,
other people should do it.
but does the world building actually help you? Because when you're telling your story, you have all of these touch points to say, well, that can't happen because that food doesn't exist. Or
yeah,
this
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
When I write a novel, I have actually started writing novels with nothing more than my character's first name, like no story idea at all.
Bob.
In the least.
There you go.
Which
Let's go.
is so exciting. I love it. And but what I always have in place is the world building. That is always the first thing I do. I usually spend about 3, maybe 6 months world building, but because I'm a discovery writer, I tend to do it all in my head. These books is what you should do. Don't do it like me.
Okay.
I carry all my world building just in my head, which is probably why I can't remember my mobile phone number. Because there's just too much in there. Now I've lost track and I can't remember what the original question was.
The question was, because I took you on a tangent. So it sounded like you had not planned out the series, but that happened after you wrote the first book. You went, I've got to cover this, but that won't fit in this book.
Yeah.
Or how did that happen?
So I wrote 30 days, and I knew that I was going to write How to Destroy the World straight after, because, like I say, those are my favorite genres, post-apoc and dystopia. Right. I'm so excited by them. And then when I had finished that one, I said to my husband, my poor long-suffering husband, I said, I think I'm done. I honestly can't think of another topic that would make an entire world-building book. And he looked at me with this look that he has when I'm being an idiot, and said, you could easily write an entire book on magic systems. I went, I don't think it could make an entire book. And then for the rest of the day, I was thinking about it, and all the chapter titles were popping into my head one after the other. Right. And I was like, okay, I've got a book. So then I wrote that one. And when I published that, I said to my husband, okay, I think I'm really done now. I can't think of another topic that I could write an entire world building book on. And he gave me that same look again and was like, why don't you do like myths and legends? I said, again, I don't think that's going to make an entire book. That time I was actually right, because I lumped it in with, so How to Create History is about creating history, myths, and monsters. And the reason I lumped them all together was because when I was thinking through it in my head, I was like, monsters, like, they're best when they're tied into the history of the world, because they feel ancient and they feel like they're meant to be in that world, which means they're very hard to kill and remove from that world. And in the same way, myths and legends, they're tied so tightly into the history of the world. So I had to put those 3 topics together into one book. And so this is what I keep doing. I keep going to my husband and going, I don't have another one. And he just gives me that look like I'm an idiot.
And he says, I know you better than that.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask a cheeky joke about it takes 30 days to build a world, but for the dystopian one, it's only like 2.5. No, but I was going to ask, that was a cheeky question. Do you have to, when you build a dystopian world, like I was going to debate the pros and cons, are you actually destroying a world, or are you creating the destruction of the world? Like, you know what I mean? Where you're actually creating a world where it is ending, or where something significant is going to change. How does that, like, how did you reconcile that? Was it actually 30 days? Do you have to have built a world, or is building the world part of destroying it?
Yeah. I mean, that one, it does, again, it takes you right from not having anything built at all to creating an entire dystopian or post-apocalyptic world. You could approach that book if you already had a world built, and you just wanted to make it horrible.
Okay.
Or you can pick up that book if you have no world at all. But I want to say about dystopian and post-apocalyptic fiction, there's this big misunderstanding that it's miserable and that it's a very miserable, horrible, hopeless kind of genre. But actually, for me, dystopian and post-apocalyptic worlds are the most hopeful fiction that you can write, because you have a dystopian world, you take this downtrodden, absolute lowest of the low character that has everything against them. They have insurmountable odds against them, yet they rise to the top and they change the world to make it better. Like, what better hope is there than that? Because when we read this fiction, it shows us that if this character can do what they want to do, fighting against the odds that they have against them, then surely we can pretty much achieve anything we want. And it's the same with post-apocalyptic fiction. This horrible thing has happened, and we see people adapting to the new world, and we see people thriving in this new creation of a world. And actually, post-apocalyptic fiction, it doesn't have to get worse after the apocalyptic event. It can actually be a much better world.
Right. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I find them really, really hopeful genres. I just love them.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. In high school, I read nothing but, called it Teotihuacan, The End of the World as We Know It, or the End of the World books. And then for grade 13, I did my report on that. And I discovered that in every single instance, except one book that I had read, and I'd only did a half dozen books for the study, it was about new beginnings. It was about hope. It was about, yes, the world has ended the way we know it, but some new hope, a new beginning, new life, new possibilities. Katniss Everdeen is going to rise up. That sort of thing is going to happen and prove that if we stand together, we can beat this. Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke, the novel ends as the world ends. That's it. And I was like, what the heck was that? Because when I read it, I didn't realize reading End of the World books were about the strength that it takes, or discovering a new way and making it happen. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more that ironically, dystopian is one of the most hopeful.
Yep.
So you mentioned something earlier I want to go back to, because I was kind of fascinated by this, because you talked about, well, the food, and you talked about the food. So is that part of the world building, like just understanding, like, okay, people got to eat. How do they eat? Where does it come from? How do they produce it?
See, that's what it is. When you go, oh, let's talk about food in world building, you're not just talking about what people are eating. You're also talking about like what they eat, how they cook it, how they store it.
Right.
How long can they store it for? How do they preserve food? And then you also, if you think about food, we have so many rituals around food.
Yes.
Like when a family sits down to a table to eat a meal, it's quite common. All the electronic devices have to be put away, and people have these rituals around food. And we have particular festivals where we eat particular kinds of food. And it all ties into our culture. It ties into our upbringing. It's like in my family, we have this thing where on New Year's Day we eat apple pie for good luck for the new year. I don't know why. I have no idea. My mum always did it. Right. Her mum always did it. So I do it with my kids. We always have apple pie, never miss a year. Even the year I had to just run to McDonald's and get one of their horrible
little well, yeah. hey, in a pinch, right? You got to do it.
And that's like, it's like just my family. This isn't like a British thing. I don't know anyone else who does this at all. It's just my family. And that's the thing about food. Like, there are norms and rituals that are like across a whole culture. And then there are norms and rituals that are just specific to one particular family. And So when you're world building, you can put all these really nice little things in, which makes the culture of your world so much richer. And you can also tie it into the story as well. You know, like food can become a conflict. If somebody hasn't got enough to eat, that's a problem. You know, that's a conflict thing. Or if they can't get a particular kind of food, or if their magic system requires food to create spells, then what happens when a particular food that's needed for a particular spell is out of season? Right. If it's really expensive to import, then only certain people are going to be able to import it when it's out of season. So there's so many ways that you can tie something that seems so simple as food into actually your story and make it really important to your story and your characters.
I love that. I just finished reading a couple of YA thrillers by T. James Logan, and in it, the werewolves have to have raw meat in order to have the power to change, and they can't change if they're just fed dog food or whatever, right? So there is a scene where someone's being held captive and they can't change because they're getting substandard food, but if it's raw meat, that's what they need in order to so that's why there's a craving for the raw. So I like that, and I never even thought of that, and it was kind of like, oh, that's interesting, because it actually affects what a character can and can't do potentially. It's spinach and Popeye, obviously. Right, so
yeah.
I mean,
imagine if he couldn't get that.
I know, then that's part of the play. It's a plot thing, right? So
yeah.
Does that mean there's going to be a book on food, or is that just an element of your world building, like the grand world building?
It is an element. I love food. Maybe I could make a whole book about food.
the world building cookbook. No, so
yeah.
But I guess so you've got food as one element. Is that kind of like does that help people with economy and structure and governments and all the different elements that may come into place?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how much it feeds into other stuff, because like I've already said how you could involve food in magic, but also food comes into religion a heck of a lot. I mean, food is a massive part of a lot of different religions. There are rules about what you can and can't eat. There are rules about when you can eat.
Right.
There are rules about how food is prepared and how animals are killed. So there it is, tying into religion.
Right.
Which also ties into politics. We know that religion and politics are often quite tied together. And it builds into the whole culture. So you'll see it cropping up in things like education. Right. You know, like when Ramadan comes around, that affects the children who are at school, you know, right, around their meal times and everything. So it all ties in. I always talk about world building. If you imagine a pool of water, and every single world building element that you create is like dropping a pebble into the water, and it creates ripples, and the more things you create, the more pebbles you drop in, and then all these ripples are going over each other and interacting with each other. When it comes to like the culture and the history of your world, you've got to remember that some of the ripples that you're creating only they might last for a few years in the world of your story, but other ripples that you create with your world building, they can last for generations or centuries or millennia, you know. So yeah, you're constantly dropping these pebbles in and creating these ripples that affect your character, they affect your story, and they affect the world building as well. So
an author is setting a book in our world as we know it today. Maybe not today, maybe 2019, right? We want to ignore what's been going on the last couple of years. But so they set it in the here and now, let's say. World building comes into play with that, right? Like even if it is our world, you're still building something. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely, because every single fictional thing you add into the world is world building. So if you're even if you're writing something like a cozy mystery and it's set in a real town, in a real place, but maybe you add a tea shop that isn't really there, or perhaps you add a detective agency that isn't really there. That's world building, and you have to create the sort of like the world within that building. I mean, you go into like a coffee shop or a tea shop, and there's a miniature culture going on inside that, and it has its norms and its values within that particular coffee shop. You know, there might be a table by the window where everyone knows, no, that's that person's table. You know, no one else would dare sit in it. Right. And then a stranger comes into town and they sit in that particular table. So
conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. So even within tiny little elements of world building, you can be creating your own miniature culture within that. And yeah, so it is world building. And people tend to think world building is just for fantasy writers or sci-fi writers. Horror writers also do a heck of a lot of world building.
Right.
And they're the heavyweights, obviously. Yeah. They're the ones doing most of the work. But pretty much any genre whatsoever, there can be elements of world building.
I love that. So I'm going to leverage this into a completely selfish exercise in picking your brain. So let's say an author, I don't know, a bald Canadian author has written a series of books set in 2014 through 2017 so far, and he already has maybe 4 books out in his series called, starts with a Canadian werewolf in New York. So it's set in real world Manhattan, but he happens to be a werewolf, and there are other paranormal beings. Could a writer like myself benefit from, for the next book where he may want to actually really explore where the magic comes from, because he hasn't up till this point, because he's a pantser? He should buy all of your books and he can learn from this? Because can you take something that exists and then use world building to then, I guess, create a consistent structure that supports all the things that happen so far? Is that something an author can do? He asks selfishly.
Yes, this completely hypothetical author with his hypothetical books. Yes, absolutely. He should 100% go out and buy all of my world building books. But I will warn you that you might turn into a world building nerd like me.
Oh, it's a cult, is it?
It is. And yeah, you might catch the bug.
Ooh.
And
okay.
I take no responsibility.
So I imagine you probably sell a lot more in paperback than ebook because you have worksheets and stuff in it. Is that true? So where can people, I'm jumping to this, we'll come back to it, but where can people find and purchase these books? They're available in print and ebook?
Yep, the paperbacks are all available from Amazon, and the ebooks are available pretty much anywhere you can buy ebooks, including directly from my own website.
Oh, cool, awesome.
And this is the year I plan to get them all in audiobook as well.
Oh, really? Oh, wow, that would be interesting, because then you'd need to buy the paperback book to do the worksheets, but then you could listen to it while you were snow pile building, which is what I do a lot of here in Canada. Oh my God, this I love this conversation, but I still wanted to talk to you about a couple things, because I know you've been doing, obviously you have a podcast for writers, so inspiring and helping writers. You got this series of books that your husband helps keep pulling a new one out of you every once in a while.
Thank goodness for him.
Well, what's happened to Angeline and her fiction? Do you still have time for fiction? When was the last book you released? Like a fiction book, I should say.
Yeah, so the last fiction book I released was last September, which is quite a long time.
What do you mean last? Like not 2021, 2020?
No. Last September, so 2021. Yeah, right. I published.
You're acting
quite
like
a lot.
It's decades ago. It was only not even 6 months. It was like what? September.
Yeah, but what is time now?
5 months. Yeah, that was about 2 years. 2 years pandemic time.
that is quite a long time for me. Yeah, so my latest fiction was called Steadyard, which was the second book in a cyberpunk series, which has almost destroyed me. I don't know. I think The problem with this particular series is that I wrote it through the 2 years of pandemic.
Oh.
And yeah, I charged on. I was like, no, I know to continue. I'm not going to let this change my life. But I have 2 small children. I was doing a lot of homeschooling all of a sudden,
Of course.
which I am neither trained for nor I don't have the temperament for it either. There was a lot of crying in the kitchen.
I thought you were the children.
Oh, me. Definitely me.
But mommy, I don't want to build another world and be great.
Yeah, hiding in the kitchen and eating copious amounts of chocolate. Yes, I plowed on through the pandemic when I should have not.
Okay, all right. Is that you're gonna return to that, right? There's not just 2 books in that series?
There will be a third, but I tend to have this habit of when I write trilogies, I write the first 2 books and then I have a big gap before I write the third.
Okay.
But I also have a big gap in the timeline as well, which is, it's what I tend to do. But I actually have 3 works in progress that I'm working on at the moment.
Goodness.
That's how I work.
Fair enough. You just Bill. I was gonna call you Angeline R. Martin Trevena for a second. There's a lot of long gaps between them. So we're being cheeky. No, but so you have other series that you've got sort of kicking around. Is that because you just enjoy moving from like world to world, so to speak?
It is, yeah. I've got a few standalones out and a bunch of different series because yes, I love jumping into different worlds. So I'm currently world building a brand new series of dark fantasy. It's based around canals, so I'm doing loads and loads of research because I know nothing about boats. I'm actually quite scared of water. And I went and spent a lot of time on a canal boat, which was quite scary for me because I don't like boats. Why am I writing about this? I don't know. I've just started writing a horror. I think it's just going to be a novella because that idea just popped into my head and the characters would not shut up.
Okay.
And I write middle grade fiction under a pen name. And I really need to write another one of that. I have started. My 9-year-old is bugging me to get on with that.
Is this a bedtime story you've been reading as you've been writing?
I do. My 9-year-old is basically my critique partner. So while he's at school, I'm meant to write a chapter. And then I read it to him for his bedtime story, and he tells me why it's not funny enough and why I need more fart jokes in it. So
that sounds like a 9-year-old, but also me. So
luckily, it's also me as well. I have that sense of humor. So yeah, me and my eldest, we sit and giggle together about how many just toilet humor jokes we can pack into my middle grade books.
Enough. I was going to ask a question because I don't know the answer to this, and it sounds like you would make an amazing person to hire if someone was having trouble with world building. Do you do that, consulting with people, then say, yes, we'll just have some sessions and I'll help pull this world out of you? Do you do that? Not
at the moment. What I keep getting asked for at the moment, people keep asking for all this stuff, and I'm like, oh, how can I pack more into my life? I don't feel like I have time at all. The other thing that I do is I'm quite a thing over on TikTok. Actually, I have over 10,000 followers.
What?
On TikTok? I know, and I actually gained them. I only started TikTok in October, so I've gained over 10,000.
What are you doing on TikTok?
I am hand drawing fantasy maps.
Oh my goodness. And it's all sped up like the videos and stuff?
Yes.
Oh my
yeah.
God.
So
am I following
I
you?
draw a fantasy map for like 10 minutes and then I speed it up so it's like a 1-minute video. And people keep asking me if I do commissions and I'm like, oh, I don't have time.
So are these maps from your worlds?
Oh, they're random. Some of them are maps from my worlds. I do some tutorials like showing people how to draw particular parts of maps. And some of them are just made up. I just like drawing islands.
So, and then you can just sell them. It's like, yes, all these things that were created on TikTok you can buy for premium price.
Yeah, again, people have been asking for that. Pre-made maps is so much easier than commission maps. So right. I am actually going to start doing pre-made maps, I think.
Is that illustration that I know my listeners can't see it, but is that illustration one of yours that's behind you?
Oh, no, it's not. But I can show you one. Look, this is a map that I've
been
working on.
And so this is kind of like one of the ones you would do. I got to go check it out on TikTok and watch the sped up video of the sketching. That's fantastic. Wow, this is such a fascinating conversation. I'm inspired to actually go buy all your books now in paperback. Awesome. I will be ordering them and getting them in paperback because I know they're ones that you're going to need to write in and stuff like that. Where can my listeners find out more about you, check out all the cool things that you're doing?
So pretty much everything you want to know about me is at angelinetrevena.co.uk. .com will also get you there. And yeah, my social media links are there, so you'll be able to come and see me drawing maps on TikTok and Instagram. I'm very lively on. I'm there all the time. Facebook and Twitter,
not so much.
I'm there, but
not as much. Well, it's the mediums that doesn't work there for you, right?
Yeah. I enjoy Instagram and TikTok.
Excellent, cool. Well, we'll have links to all of that in the show notes. Will you be able to send links to that thing you did? You said you had the Pinterest. Is it Pinterest or was it Instagram? The 30-day challenge, or was that a one-time only thing?
Oh yeah, that was a long time ago.
Oh, okay. We don't want to look at that. That's like Mark's grade 6 drawings.
No, that was goodness. That might even be back as far as like 2018 that we did that. Oh, really? Yeah, okay. That was. Yeah, of course, really, it wasn't that long ago because the 1990s were only like 10 years ago, right? Weren't they? Promised me.
Yeah, they were. I was going to say, well, that's on my MySpace page, which doesn't exist anymore.
I had MySpace.
Angelina.
We're showing our age, aren't we?
Yeah, again. Angelina, it was so wonderful to get a chance to chat with you again. Thanks so much for sharing all these great insights with my listeners.
Thank you very much for having me.
I wanted to reflect on, in fact, just fascinated by the world building and how Angeline, like the origin of how she did this with 30 prompts and 30 days and translated that into a book. And of course, I mean, the challenge I think that all of us authors who do nonfiction to help other writers is it takes us away from those other novels and other books and things that we're really passionate about writing. But I wanted to focus a little bit on food because we talked quite a bit about food and the ritual surrounding food and how food has a lot to do with culture and it has to do with religion and it has to do with magic in certain types of worlds. Like I'd mentioned the T. James Logan series where they had to eat raw meat in order to be able to turn from human to wolf or wolf to human, etc. Just the strength, it was a requirement. And I think about that sort of importance of food. When you think, like, what is food to us in general? It's such a powerful thing. I mean, I've played with food with Michael Andrews because I know that when he turns into a wolf, it burns a ton of calories. So he needs food, and he's constantly eating. And I made reference to that in the first book. There's a scene where he's hilariously eating in front of his agent, and the agent's mocking him. But of course, the agent's also mocking him about his ketchup. So there's the things that can happen during a meal that can be character showing, like the foods they don't like, foods they love, things they're allergic to, which can also be poisonous in mysteries and stuff like that. But, like the fact that Michael puts a ton of ketchup on his eggs and it just grosses out his agent. There's behavior with our food that really speaks to character. There are people who are very sensitive. I know Liz and her daughters are very much like this, that, the noise people make when they chew drives them nuts. So many of little things you can do as a writer related to food and how that can interact. But I even think about rituals surrounding food. I remember when I was working at McMaster University and I was using the espresso book machine, was going to print a book for a retired professor who's wanted to use the machine to print some books. But before he signed a deal where I would work with him, he invited my son, Alexander, and I to join him and his wife at his home for lunch. And it was the old standard, I will not work with you unless we break bread together. And I thought that was such a wonderful, beautiful, poignant moment. Wonderful man, wonderful family. Got a chance to get to know him before we did business together. And I love that. I love that sort of ritual. But when you think about that, I think, so Liz and I met for our first date for beer. We met at a brewery, a restaurant brewery in on the waterfront in Toronto, Ontario. And it was sort of it was one of those things where we'll meet for a beer around dinner time and we'll kind of see how it goes from there. We ended up, the beer turned into ordering a meal and then ordering dessert and then coffee. And so the food wasn't an excuse, right? Like, let's go out for a dinner date. The food is an excuse to get together because we have to eat to survive. And we build so many rituals around that. Obviously, going out on a date, going for drinks, going for coffee. I was talking to Alyssa, for example, who was in the last episode, who lives in my neighborhood. Let's talk writing. Okay, we live in the same town. Let's meet for a coffee or a beer or whatever. There's rituals of friendship. You go back to Superstar's writing seminars. All the different writers. I had the privilege of having lunch or dinner. I didn't have breakfast with anyone because I was up really early. I ate like a Cliff Bar, had a coffee. I did have breakfast with one of my editors, Joshua Esso, there, but it was sort of not a second breakfast. We were hobbits. We had a second breakfast. I had a Cliff Bar in the morning, and then it was kind of like we both had some time. We wanted to get together and chat, so we went to Starbucks, grabbed a coffee and a sandwich. So we had that ritual where we did some work together, but we also did the meals. And I just think that's such a significant element. When you're if you're creating a world or you're writing fiction set in our world, think about all of the different ways that people can interact together with the ritual, the culture, the habits of food, and what it can do to shape your characters, what it can do to shape your world, what it can do to help you express subtle elements about your characters and the way they interact with food and the way they interact with other people. I think I was talking to someone from Superstars, and there's some people who have sort of not a phobia, but they can't stand eating in front of other people who aren't eating. And so again, there's all of these elements, all of these subtleties. I'm kind of hoping Angeline does something with food in terms of the culture. I remember it was the medievalist. Oh my God, I'm trying to remember her name. Scott Overton's daughter, actually, Danielle. And I'll have an episode, a link to an episode of my podcast where I interviewed her way back when. I should really bring her on, but she talks about historic elements that she helps people, like medieval, which she was a specialist in. And so she has these guides on, if you're writing medieval, here are the details, here are the elements you need to get right. And boy, you better get the food right, because of the way they prepared food, the way that they stored food, the way that they consumed food, the way they acquired food was different, and you want to get that absolutely correct, because you're going to kick readers out of the story. So with all that food into play, it's still about an hour and a half from dinner time, but I'm hungry. Are you hungry? I'm hungry to write a good scene about food, but I'm also hungry to sit down and put some more food into my mouth. But that's it for this episode. That's it for the reflection. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Angeline. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you like the podcast, do feel free to share it with someone that you think would get value out of it. You can also go ahead and leave me a review on the podcatcher of your choice. Did you know, dear listener, last time I looked, we were nearing 100,000 downloads. I'm going to have a little teeny tiny, private party song and dance, maybe do a little soft shoe. Get so excited for 100,000 downloads of this podcast. And that's thanks to you. Yes, you helped make this happen, dear listener. So thank you for being with me this episode. And so until next episode, which is most likely going to be next week, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.